The crack of a whip echoed through the dusty street of Whispering Pines, Colorado. 1875, followed by the sound of a woman's muffled cry. 18-year-old Josephine Lawson flinched as the foreman's leather strap came down once more across her back, the thin fabric of her dress offering little protection against the brutal assault. Her crime, speaking out against the unfair treatment of workers at the Harrington textile mill where she'd been employed for less than a month. "You'll hold your tongue when Mr. Harrington speaks, girl," the foreman shouted, raising his arm for another blow. "Women ain't got no business voicing opinions." The small crowd that had gathered watched in uncomfortable silence. Some turned away, unwilling to witness the public punishment, while others nodded in grim approval. In Whispering Pines, a woman who spoke out of turn was considered dangerous, a threat to the natural order of things. Just as the foreman's arm began its downward arc once more, a powerful hand caught his wrist mid-swing. The crowd gasped as a tall figure stepped between Josephine and her tormentor. "That's enough," said a deep voice, calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "The ladies had sufficient reminder of your rules." The foreman's face reddened with rage as he struggled against the iron grip. "This ain't your business, Avery. This girl needs to learn her place." Ethan Avery, a 30-year-old rancher known throughout the territory for his fair dealings and formidable presence, tightened his grip until the foreman winced. Though he wasn't wearing his guns today, having come to town for supplies, his reputation as a skilled marksman preceded him. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed dangerously. "I said enough." The crowd murmured as the foreman yanked his arm free, backing away with a scowl. "Mr. Harrington won't stand for this interference." "Mr. Harrington can take it up with me personally," Ethan replied, his voice even. He turned to Josephine, who stood trembling, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins, eyes downcast as tears streaked her dirt-smudged face. Blood seeped through the back of her dress, and the sight of it made something fierce and protective rise in Ethan's chest. "Miss, can you walk?" he asked, softening his tone. Josephine nodded mutely, afraid to speak lest she bring more punishment upon herself. The foreman had made it clear that her voice was not welcome in public. "You're coming with me," Ethan said, removing his coat and gently draping it over her shoulders to cover her torn dress. "I've got a wagon outside town. We'll get those wounds tended to." As he guided her away from the crowd, the foreman called after them, "She's fired. Tell that mouthy girl she's never working in this town again." Ethan paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Better unemployed than dead from a beating." He leaned closer to Josephine and whispered, "Don't worry about him. Speak only to me from now on, and you'll be safe." Josephine looked up at the stranger, uncertain whether she'd just been rescued or claimed. His expression was hard to read, stern yet somehow kind, his jaw set with determination. She had no reason to trust this man, but with blood trickling down her back and nowhere to go, what choice did she have? She followed him to a wagon parked at the edge of town, climbing up with difficulty as pain radiated through her body. Ethan handled the reins with practiced ease, guiding the team of horses away from Whispering Pines and toward the open country beyond. "I'm Ethan Avery," he said after they'd traveled in silence for several miles. "I have a ranch about an hour's ride from here. My housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, can tend to your injuries." Josephine hesitated, unsure if she was permitted to respond. Ethan glanced at her, noting her uncertainty. "You can speak freely with me, miss." "Josephine Lawson," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Thank you for intervening, Mr. Avery, but I have nowhere to go. I came west on my own after my parents died. That mill job was all I had." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Miss Lawson, as it happens, Mrs. Perkins has been complaining that she needs help with the cooking and cleaning. The ranch is growing and she can't keep up alone. Would you be interested in employment? Room and board included, of course." Josephine stared at him in disbelief. "You'd offer me a position without knowing anything about me after what just happened?" "I know enough," Ethan replied. "I know you had the courage to speak up when something wasn't right. That tells me more about your character than a formal reference ever could." For the first time since the ordeal began, Josephine felt a glimmer of hope. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Avery, and I'm a good cook. My mother taught me." "Then it's settled," Ethan said with a nod, "though I should warn you we're a bit isolated out at Silverleaf Ranch." Towns a fair ride away and winters can be harsh. But no one will raise a hand to you there, and your voice will be respected. As the wagon rolled through the vast Colorado landscape, Josephine studied her rescuer's profile. Ethan Avery wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too rugged, his expression too serious, but there was something compelling about him. His eyes carried a depth of experience that suggested he understood hardship. His hands, strong enough to stop a whip mid-strike, handled the reins with surprising gentleness. "What did you say at the mill that earned you such punishment?" Ethan asked after a while, breaking the silence. Josephine tensed, the memory still fresh. Mr. Harrington announced he was cutting wages for the women workers by 20% while keeping the men's pay the same. I pointed out that we do the same work for less already. He said it was because women were naturally slower and less reliable. Her cheeks flushed with anger at the recollection. I told him that was false, that the women in his mill work just as hard as the men, often with greater precision. That's when he ordered the foreman to teach me my place. Ethan's jaw tightened. Harrington's been underpaying his workers for years. Most are too desperate for work to speak against him. "Well, I've never been good at staying silent when I see injustice," Josephine admitted. "My father always said it would get me into trouble someday." "And he was right," Ethan said, though there was no admonishment in his tone. "But there's a difference between speaking up and knowing when and how to fight your battles." He glanced at her. "At Silverleaf, you'll be free to speak your mind, but you should know that Whispering Pines doesn't take kindly to women with opinions. If you come into town with me, it might be safer to stay quiet in public." Josephine nodded, understanding the warning behind his words. "Is that what you meant when you said I should speak only to you?" "Partly," Ethan admitted. "I also said it to get you away from that situation. The foreman might have backed off temporarily, but men like that hold grudges." As they crested a hill, Silverleaf Ranch came into view, a sprawling property nestled in a valley, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and vast pastures where cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, lined with the silver-leafed cottonwoods that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," Josephine whispered, taking in the sight. "It's home," Ethan replied simply. "Built it from nothing 10 years ago." As they approached the main house, a stout woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern when she spotted Josephine's condition. "Mrs. Perkins," Ethan called out as he brought the wagon to a stop. "We have a new addition to Silverleaf. This is Miss Josephine Lawson. She's had some trouble in town and needs medical attention." Mrs. Perkins hurried forward, her kind face creased with worry. "Good heavens, child, what happened to you?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned to Ethan. "Get her inside, Mr. Avery. I'll prepare hot water and bandages." With surprising gentleness, Ethan helped Josephine down from the wagon, steadying her when she swayed from pain and exhaustion. "Mrs. Perkins will take good care of you," he assured her. "She's been patching up cowboys for decades." Inside, the ranch house was warm and welcoming, with sturdy furniture and simple but tasteful decorations. Josephine was led to a small bedroom off the kitchen, where Mrs. Perkins helped her remove her bloodied dress. "Merciful heavens," the older woman muttered when she saw the angry welts across Josephine's back. "Who did this to you, child?" "Harrington's foreman," Ethan answered from the doorway, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Miss Lawson had the audacity to suggest women deserved equal pay for equal work." Mrs. Perkins clicked her tongue sympathetically as she began cleaning the wounds. "That sounds like something Hannah would have said." Josephine noticed how Ethan's expression changed at the mention of that name, a flash of pain quickly masked. "Who's Hannah?" she asked. Mrs. Perkins hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "My wife," he said quietly. "She died 5 years ago during a difficult childbirth, our son with her." "I'm so sorry," Josephine whispered, understanding now the shadow that seemed to follow him. Ethan nodded once, his jaw tight. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Perkins' capable hands. We'll speak more at supper." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. "Don't mind him," Mrs. Perkins said softly as she applied a soothing salve to Josephine's back. "He's not much for words, especially about Hannah. They were childhood sweethearts, married young. Her loss nearly destroyed him." "He seems solitary," Josephine observed. That he is, Mrs. Perkins agreed. Throws himself into the ranch work from dawn till dusk. Rarely goes to town except for supplies. You're the first person he's brought home in years. She paused in her ministrations. Whatever you said or did must have struck a chord with him. Josephine thought about this as Mrs. Perkins bandaged her wounds and helped her into a borrowed nightgown. He said there might be work for me here. The housekeeper nodded. Indeed there is. This place has grown too big for me to manage alone. The men have their duties with the cattle and horses, but the cooking and cleaning fall to me. Having another pair of hands would be a blessing. She smiled warmly. Once you're healed, of course. After Mrs. Perkins left, Josephine lay in the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts swirling. In the span of a day, she'd lost her position at the mill, been publicly beaten, and found herself in the home of a stranger, a taciturn rancher with sad eyes who defended her without hesitation. She should have been terrified, but something about Ethan Avery made her feel safe. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of ranch life men calling to each other, the lowing of cattle, horses nickering in the stables. It was a world away from the clatter and bustle of the textile mill. As exhaustion overtook her, Josephine wondered what tomorrow would bring in this new life that had been thrust upon her. She awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the air. For a moment, Josephine couldn't remember where she was, but the sharp pain across her back when she moved quickly reminded her. A soft knock at the door was followed by Mrs. Perkins entering with a tray. "Good morning, dear. I've brought you some breakfast. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Josephine admitted, "but better than yesterday. Thank you for your kindness." "No need for thanks," the older woman replied, setting the tray across Josephine's lap. "It's nice having another woman around. The ranch hands are good boys, but they're not much for conversation beyond cattle and horses." Josephine smiled, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "How many work here?" "6 full-time plus a few seasonal hands during calving and roundup," Mrs. Perkins explained. "They stay in the bunkhouse, except for Eduardo, our foreman, who has a small cabin by the corrals. Mr. Avery runs a tight operation, but he's fair, pays better than most ranchers in these parts." "And you've been here long?" "Since the beginning," Mrs. Perkins said proudly. "My late husband was Mr. Avery's first hire when he bought this land. After John passed from pneumonia 7 years back, Mr. Avery offered me the housekeeper position, said he couldn't imagine Silverleaf without a Perkins." Her eyes softened with memory. "He's a good man, our Mr. Avery, despite his gruff ways." After breakfast, Josephine insisted on getting up despite Mrs. Perkins' protests. "I can't lie abed all day," she said firmly. "If I'm to work here, I should learn my duties." Reluctantly, Mrs. Perkins helped her dress in a simple brown skirt and white blouse borrowed from her own wardrobe. "Mr. Avery mentioned taking you to town next week to purchase some proper clothes," she said as she fastened the buttons. "The dress you arrived in is beyond salvaging, I'm afraid." "That's very generous of him," Josephine said, surprised. "I don't know how I'll repay such kindness." "Hard work will be repayment enough," came Ethan's voice from the doorway. He stood there in his work clothes, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and scuffed boots. His dark hair was damp as if he'd just washed, and his face was freshly shaven. "Mr. Avery," Josephine said, feeling suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed clothes. "Good morning. You should be resting," he said, his brow furrowing as he noted she was up and dressed. "I'm not one for idleness," she replied. "Besides, the sooner I learn my duties, the sooner I can earn my keep." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Very well, but nothing strenuous today. Mrs. Perkins will show you around the house and grounds. Tomorrow's soon enough to start work." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like you to join me for supper in my study this evening. There are matters we should discuss regarding your position here." With that, he nodded briefly and departed, leaving Josephine wondering what those matters might be. Mrs. Perkins chuckled at her expression. "Don't look so worried, dear. He's probably just wanting to establish your wages and duties. Mr. Avery likes everything properly arranged." The day passed quickly as Mrs. Perkins showed Josephine around the spacious ranch house. Built primarily of local timber and stone, it featured a large kitchen with a cast iron stove, a formal dining room used mainly when guests visited, a comfortable parlor, Ethan's study, and several bedrooms upstairs. The furnishings were solid and practical rather than ornate, though Josephine noticed several beautiful handmade quilts and fine paintings that added warmth to the rooms. Hannah loved beauty, Mrs. Perkins explained when she caught Josephine admiring a landscape on the wall. She was always finding ways to make the house more inviting. Mr. Avery hasn't changed much since she passed. Outside, Josephine was introduced to the ranch hands as they came in for their midday meal. They were a diverse group, two brothers from Texas, a former soldier from back east, a young man who'd worked cattle drives since he was 14, and Eduardo, the Mexican foreman who'd been with Ethan almost from the beginning. All treated her with polite respect, though she caught curious glances as they clearly wondered about her presence. "News travels fast," Eduardo explained when they had a moment alone. "We heard about what happened in town. The boss was right to bring you here. Harrington's foreman has a mean reputation, especially with women who cross him." Josephine shivered at the reminder. "Does Mr. Avery often intervene in such situations?" Eduardo considered this. "Not often, no. The boss generally keeps to himself. But he has a strong sense of justice, cannot abide bullies or those who harm the defenseless." He studied her with thoughtful eyes. "You must have made quite an impression, señorita." By evening, Josephine was exhausted but determined not to show it as she prepared for her meeting with Ethan. Mrs. Perkins helped her dress in a clean blouse and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. "Remember, Mr. Avery's bark is worse than his bite," the housekeeper assured her. "Just be honest with him, that's what he values most." Promptly at 7, Josephine knocked on the study door, her heart inexplicably racing. "Enter," called Ethan's deep voice. The study was smaller than she'd expected, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting warm light across the room. Ethan stood as she entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit down, Miss Lawson. How are your injuries?" "Healing well, thank you," she replied, taking the offered seat. "Mrs. Perkins is an excellent nurse." Ethan nodded, resuming his own seat. "She's had plenty of practice over the years." He studied Josephine for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I imagine you have questions about your situation here." "Several," Josephine admitted. "Though your kindness has been overwhelming, Mr. Avery, I'm still unclear as to why you intervened yesterday or why you've offered me employment." Ethan's fingers drummed briefly on the desk before he spoke. "I intervened because what was happening was wrong. No one else was going to stop it." He paused. "As for employment, it's true we need help here, but I won't pretend there wasn't another reason." Josephine waited, her curiosity piqued. "You reminded me of someone," he said finally, his voice softer. "My late wife had a similar spirit, unwilling to stay silent in the face of injustice, regardless of the consequences." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It got her into trouble more than once." "Mrs. Perkins mentioned you were childhood sweethearts," Josephine said gently. "We grew up neighboring ranches in Wyoming," Ethan confirmed. "Married at 18, came to Colorado to start our own place away from family expectations. Hannah loved it here, said the mountains spoke to her soul." His expression darkened. "We had 7 good years before she died." "I'm truly sorry for your loss," Josephine said, meaning it. Ethan acknowledged her sympathy with a nod. "The point is, Miss Lawson, I recognized something in you yesterday, a strength of character that's rare, especially in these parts. Silverleaf could use someone like you." "As a housekeeper's assistant," Josephine clarified, wanting to be certain of her position. "For now," Ethan agreed. "Though I suspect your talents extend beyond cooking and cleaning. Mrs. Perkins mentioned you're educated." "My father was a schoolteacher," she explained. "He believed daughters should receive the same education as sons. I can read, write, cipher, and keep accounts." Interest sparked in Ethan's eyes. "That could prove useful. The ranch books need organizing. Would you be willing to assist with that as well?" "Of course," Josephine said, pleased at the prospect of using her mind as well as her hands. "Good. Now, as to your wages, I'll pay you $20 monthly plus room and board." "Fair?" Josephine's eyes widened. It was nearly twice what she'd earned at the mill. "More than fair, Mr. Avery." "Ethan," he corrected her, "if we're to work closely together, formality seems unnecessary." "Then you must call me Josephine," she replied, "or Joe, as my father did." "Joe," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you." He rose and moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a bottle and 2 glasses. "Would you care for a drink? It's good brandy, I save it for special occasions." "Is this a special occasion?" she asked, accepting the glass he offered, the first new hire at Silverleaf in 3 years. Ethan raised his glass slightly. "I'd say that qualifies." They drank in companionable silence for a moment, the brandy warming Josephine from within. She studied Ethan over the rim of her glass, noting how the firelight softened his features, making him appear younger, less careworn. "There's one more thing," Ethan said, setting his glass down. "Your safety." Josephine tensed. "You think I'm still in danger from the foreman?" "I think it's a possibility we can't dismiss," Ethan replied seriously. "Men like that don't forget perceived insults easily, which is why I'd prefer you not go into town alone, at least for the first few months." "I'm to be a prisoner here?" Josephine asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Not a prisoner," Ethan corrected firmly. "A protected employee, there's a difference." "And who decides when it's safe for me to come and go freely?" Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Miss Lawson, Joe, I'm trying to ensure your safety, not restrict your freedom. If you find the conditions unacceptable, you're free to leave, though I would strongly advise against returning to Whispering Pines." Josephine sighed, recognizing the logic in his words even as she chafed at the limitations. "I apologize for my tone. You've shown me nothing but kindness, and I'm grateful. It's just, I came west seeking independence." "And found yourself more dependent than ever," Ethan finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "I don't intend this arrangement to be permanent, just until we're certain the danger has passed." He rose and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening ranch yard. "This land represents freedom to me, Joe. I'd never willingly make it a cage for anyone else." Something in his voice, a quiet sincerity, convinced her more than any argument could have. "I understand," she said softly, "and I accept your terms, Ethan." He turned back to her, relief evident in his expression. "Thank you. Now Mrs. Perkins has prepared supper. Shall we join her in the dining room?" As they walked together down the hallway, Josephine felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the violent upheaval of yesterday had somehow set her on a path she was meant to follow. It was too soon to know where that path might lead. But for tonight, at least, she had food, shelter, and the promise of honest work, more than many could claim in this harsh, beautiful land. The days at Silverleaf quickly fell into a rhythm. Josephine rose at dawn with Mrs. Perkins to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learned the intricacies of running the large household, and spent afternoons organizing Ethan's account books, which had indeed been in dire need of attention. Her back healed quickly, leaving only faint scars that Mrs. Perkins assured her would fade with time. True to his word, Ethan took her to town after a week, not to Whispering Pines, but to the larger settlement of Cedar Ridge, 20 miles in the opposite direction. There she purchased fabric and ready-made garments, feeling self-conscious as Ethan insisted on paying for everything. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said when she protested. "You can't work effectively without proper clothing." The trip to Cedar Ridge also gave Josephine her first real glimpse of Ethan's standing in the community. Everywhere they went, people greeted him with respect bordering on deference. The banker invited them to dinner, which Ethan politely declined. The general store owner extended credit without question. Even the rough-looking men in the saloon nodded acknowledgement as they passed. "You're well regarded here," Josephine observed as they loaded their purchases into the wagon for the journey home. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "I've done business here for years. People know I keep my word." "It's more than that," she pressed. "They trust you. That's rare out here, isn't it?" "Trust has to be earned," he replied simply, "and it can be lost in an instant." "I try to remember that in all my dealings." As spring warmed into summer, Josephine found herself increasingly drawn to the enigmatic rancher. Ethan was a man of contradictions, stern with his men when work demanded it, yet quick to praise a job well done. Reserved in company, but surprisingly articulate when discussing books from his extensive library. Capable of frightening intensity when angered, yet unfailingly gentle with injured animals or children from neighboring ranches. They began taking supper together in his study several evenings a week, discussing the day's work before inevitably turning to wider topics: politics, literature, the changing face of the West. Josephine found in Ethan an unexpected intellectual companion, someone who considered her opinions worthy of serious debate rather than dismissing them as women's notions. "You've read Thoreau?" he asked one evening, surprised when she referenced Walden. "My father had eclectic tastes," she explained. "He believed ignorance was the only true sin, so our home was filled with books of all kinds." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "You must miss him terribly." "Every day," Josephine admitted. "Both my parents." They died within months of each other, mother first from influenza, then father from what the doctor called a weakened heart, though I think it was really grief. They were devoted to each other. "Like my parents," Ethan said softly. "When my father passed last year, mother followed within weeks. My brother runs the family ranch now in Wyoming." "You have a brother?" Josephine asked, realizing how little she still knew about Ethan's past. "Two brothers and a sister," he confirmed. "I'm the second son. James, the eldest, was always destined for the family ranch. I wanted my own place, my own legacy." "And you've built it," Josephine said, gesturing to encompass Silverleaf. "Your family must be proud." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "They wanted me to return after Hannah died, said a man alone had no business running a ranch this size, but I couldn't leave. This land, this house, it's all I have left of her." The vulnerability in his admission touched Josephine deeply. It was the most he'd spoken of Hannah since that first day, and she sensed the trust implicit in his words. "I understand," she said gently. "Some places hold our memories so strongly that leaving would feel like losing those we loved all over again." Ethan looked at her with sudden intensity. "Exactly, how did you—" He stopped, shaking his head slightly. "You have an uncommon gift for understanding, Jo." The use of her familiar name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Over the weeks, their formal address had gradually given way to Ethan and Jo in private, though they maintained proprieties in front of others. Each time he said her name in that deep voice, something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "I should help Mrs. Perkins with the breakfast preparations for tomorrow." Ethan stood as well, coming around the desk to open the door for her. They found themselves standing closer than propriety strictly allowed, and for a breathless moment, Josephine thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, his expression carefully neutral once more. "Good night, Jo. Sleep well." "Good night, Ethan." As summer progressed, Josephine's duties expanded beyond the house. She learned to ride properly on a gentle mare Ethan selected for her, discovered the satisfaction of helping deliver a calf during a difficult birth, and even convinced the cook to teach her how to make the spicy Mexican dishes the ranch hands favored. One hot August afternoon, she was returning from delivering lunch to the men working the north pasture when she spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of Whispering Pines. Shading her eyes, she made out 3 riders coming fast toward the ranch house. Instinctively, she urged her mare into a gallop, racing to reach the house before the visitors. Something about their purposeful approach raised alarm bells in her mind. Ethan was in the barn when she arrived, discussing breeding stock with Eduardo. He looked up in surprise as she rushed in, breathless from her ride. 3 riders coming from Whispering Pines, she reported quickly. Riding hard, Ethan and Eduardo exchanged glances. "Get inside the house, Jo," Ethan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Tell Mrs. Perkins to stay with you." "But who would now, Jo?" Ethan cut her off, already striding toward the gun cabinet in the barn office. "Please." The urgency in his tone convinced her. Josephine hurried to the house, finding Mrs. Perkins kneading bread in the kitchen. "Riders coming," she explained tersely. "Ethan says to stay inside with you." The older woman immediately wiped her hands on her apron. "From which direction?" "Whispering Pines." Mrs. Perkins' expression darkened. "That can't be good. No one from Pines comes here except on urgent business." She moved to the window, peering out toward the approaching dust cloud. 3, you say?" Josephine nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "Do you think, could it be about me?" "It's been nearly 4 months," Mrs. Perkins said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Most grudges cool by then." They watched from the window as the riders approached the ranch yard. Ethan stood waiting, Eduardo and 2 other ranch hands flanking him. All were armed, though their weapons remained holstered. The lead rider reined in his horse sharply, sending dust billowing. Even from a distance, Josephine recognized him with a sick feeling. Harrington's foreman, the man who had beaten her in the street. With him were two rough-looking men she didn't know. "I can't hear what they're saying," Josephine whispered, straining to make out the conversation. Mrs. Perkins put a restraining hand on her arm. "Stay back from the window, child. If they see you, it might inflame the situation." Outside, the discussion was growing heated. The foreman gestured angrily toward the house, while Ethan stood his ground, his stance deceptively relaxed but ready. When the foreman made a move toward his gun, Eduardo and the ranch hands immediately drew theirs, creating a tense standoff. For several taut seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the foreman raised his hands, saying something that made Ethan's face harden. After another brief exchange, the visitors turned their horses and rode away, though not before the foreman spat on the ground at Ethan's feet. "Thank heavens," Mrs. Perkins breathed as the dust cloud receded. "I feared we'd have bloodshed today." Josephine's legs felt suddenly weak with relief. She sank into a kitchen chair, her hands trembling slightly. "What did they want?" "We'll know soon enough," Mrs. Perkins replied as Ethan strode toward the house, his expression thunderous. He entered the kitchen like a storm, his eyes immediately finding Josephine. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm fine," she assured him. "What did they want?" Ethan glanced at Mrs. Perkins, who nodded and discreetly left the room, closing the door behind her. "Harrington's foreman Warren is his name, claims you stole money from the mill before you left," Ethan said bluntly. "Says he has witnesses who saw you near the safe the day before the incident in town." Josephine gasped, rising to her feet. "That's absurd. I never went anywhere near the office, let alone the safe. I worked on the factory floor." "I know," Ethan said, his voice softening. "I told him as much." "Then why?" "Because he's not after justice, Joe. He's after you." Ethan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Your speaking out embarrassed him publicly. Men like Warren don't forget such things." "What does he want?" Josephine asked, though she feared she already knew. "He said the charges would be dropped if you returned to Whispering Pines to work off your debt at the Stallion Saloon." Ethan's disgust was evident. "When I refused, he threatened to return with the sheriff." Horror washed over Josephine as she understood the implication. The Stallion was notorious a place where desperate women sold themselves to survive. "They can't force me to. "No," Ethan said firmly, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "No one will force you to do anything, Joe, I promise you that." The warmth of his hands steadied her. "But if the sheriff believes their lies, Sheriff Collins is Harrington's man," Ethan acknowledged grimly. "But he has no jurisdiction here in Cedar Ridge County. Our sheriff is Thomas Grant, a good man who won't be swayed by false accusations." His grip tightened on her hands. "But this does mean you can't risk going anywhere near Whispering Pines, not until this is resolved." Josephine nodded, the reality of her situation sinking in. She truly was trapped now not by Ethan's protective instincts, but by malicious lies designed to punish her for daring to speak up. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sudden tears stinging her eyes. "I've brought trouble to your door." "Don't," Ethan said sharply. "Don't apologize for their wickedness." He released her hands and stepped back, visibly collecting himself. "We'll get through this, Joe. Warren and Harrington won't win." Something in his tone, a fierce, personal determination, made Josephine look at him more closely. "This isn't just about me, is it?" Ethan hesitated, then sighed heavily. "No, Harrington's been trying to buy land bordering his properties for years, including part of Silverleaf. I've refused his offers repeatedly. So this is revenge against both of us," Josephine realized. "He's using me to get to you and you to get to me." "It appears so," Ethan agreed grimly, "but he's underestimated both of us if he thinks this will work." A dangerous smile touched his lips. "And he's certainly underestimated what I'm willing to do to protect what's mine." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them, ambiguous, laden with potential meanings. Did he mean the ranch, or something more? Before Josephine could pursue that thought, Eduardo appeared at the door. "Boss, riders coming from the east. Looks like Sheriff Grant." Ethan nodded. "Good. I sent Miguel to fetch him after I got word of Warren's accusations." He turned back to Josephine. "Stay inside for now. I'll explain everything to Thomas." She watched from the window as Ethan greeted the approaching sheriff, a solid, middle-aged man with a magnificent mustache. and a no-nonsense demeanor. Their conversation was lengthy, with much gesturing toward Whispering Pines and occasional glances toward the house. Finally, Ethan motioned for Josephine to join them. She stepped out into the yard, squinting against the late afternoon sun. "Miss Lawson," Sheriff Grant said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Avery has explained your situation, troubling business." "Sheriff," she acknowledged nervously. "I assure you I never stole anything." "I believe you," the sheriff said, surprising her. "Harrington's pulled similar stunts before accusing folks who cross him of crimes to pressure them. Unfortunately, without proof one way or another, it becomes your word against theirs." "So there's nothing we can do?" Josephine asked, disappointment washing over her. "I didn't say that," Sheriff Grant replied with a slight smile. "I've sent a deputy to investigate at the mill. If the amount allegedly stolen matches a recent large purchase by Harrington or Warren, we might have proof of fabrication." "And in the meantime," Ethan asked, "in the meantime, Miss Lawson should stay here where she's safe," the sheriff advised. "And you, Avery, might want to increase patrols around your property. Warren's not above trying to intimidate through vandalism or cattle rustling." After the sheriff departed, promising to return once his deputy reported back, an uneasy silence fell over Silverleaf. The ranch hands took turns riding the boundaries, checking for intruders. Ethan insisted Josephine not ride out alone, even on ranch property. The carefree rhythm of summer gave way to vigilant caution. Yet amid the tension, something else was growing between Ethan and Josephine, a deepening connection forged in shared adversity. Their evening conversations in the study grew longer, more personal. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, reading books from his collection. Other times, they talked until the small hours, sharing memories and dreams in the intimate darkness. "What did you want to be before life intervened?" Ethan asked one night as they sat before the fire, autumn's first chill having descended on the ranch. Josephine considered the question. "A teacher like my father, or perhaps a writer. I've always loved stories." "You'd be good at either," he said with quiet certainty. "You have a way with words." "What about you?" she asked. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" "Always," Ethan confirmed, his gaze on the dancing flames. "Though my father wanted me to study law, said I had the mind for it." He smiled ruefully. "But I couldn't imagine being confined to an office buried in paperwork." "Says the man who spends hours poring over breeding records and account ledgers," Josephine teased gently. Ethan laughed, a rare, rich sound that warmed her more than the fire. "Fair point, but that's different. That paperwork serves the ranch, and legal work wouldn't, not in the same way." He turned to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. "This land, it gets in your blood, Joe. Becomes part of you in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it." "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said softly. "There's a permanence here, a sense of being connected to something larger and more enduring than oneself." Surprise and pleasure flashed across Ethan's face. "Yes, exactly that." He hesitated, then added, "Hannah felt it too. She used to say Silverleaf was our anchor in a changing world." It was the first time he'd mentioned Hannah without pain shadowing his features. Josephine recognized the significance of that and chose her next words carefully. "She must have been remarkable to recognize the special quality of this place, and to win your heart." "She was," Ethan agreed, his voice soft with memory. "Stubborn as they come, brilliant with horses, terrible at cooking." A fond smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Perkins used to despair of ever teaching her." "I wish I could have known her," Josephine said sincerely. Ethan studied her for a long moment, firelight playing across his features. "She would have liked you, Joe, very much." The words felt like a blessing, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had yet dared to name. Josephine's heart quickened as Ethan rose from his chair and moved to stand before her, extending his hand. "It's late," he said, his voice deeper than usual. "May I walk you to your room?" It was a departure from their usual routine. Normally, they simply bid each other good night in the study. This offer suggested a shift in their relationship, small but significant. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. "Thank you." They walked through the quiet house, their footsteps muffled by the thick rugs Hannah had selected years ago. At Josephine's door, Ethan paused, still holding her hand. "Joe," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "Yes." she prompted softly. Instead of speaking, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture, old-fashioned and courtly, sent a tremor through her. "Good night," he said simply, releasing her hand and stepping back. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered, her skin still tingling where his lips had touched. As she closed her door, Josephine leaned against it, her heart racing. Something fundamental had changed tonight, though she couldn't have said exactly what. All she knew was that Ethan Avery had come to mean far more to her than an employer or protector. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Outside her window, the vast Colorado sky spread star-studded and infinite, while inside her heart, new possibilities bloomed like desert flowers after rain. The next morning brought news. Sheriff Grant arrived at Silverleaf just as breakfast was concluding, his expression grave but satisfied. "My deputy found something interesting at the mill," he announced to Ethan and Josephine as they sat in the study. The day after the alleged theft, Warren purchased a new thoroughbred stallion paid cash, exactly the amount supposedly stolen from the safe. "That's hardly conclusive," Ethan pointed out, though hope flickered in his eyes. "No, but this is," the sheriff continued, producing a folded document from his vest pocket. A signed statement from the mill's night watchman, who observed Warren opening the safe himself that evening. "The man was afraid to come forward initially, but my deputy can be persuasive." Josephine's hands flew to her mouth. "So it was Warren himself who took the money." "Appears so," Sheriff Grant confirmed. "I've issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of theft and false accusation." Harrington's protesting, of course, claiming the watchman is lying, but the evidence is compelling. Relief flooded through Josephine. "Does this mean?" "It means you're cleared, Miss Lawson," the sheriff said with a smile. "You can go into Whispering Pines without fear of arrest, though given the circumstances, I wouldn't recommend it. Harrington still has influence there." "I have no desire to return," Josephine assured him. "My life is here now." She didn't miss the look that passed between Ethan and the sheriff at her words, something knowing in Grant's expression, something almost vulnerable in Ethan's. After the sheriff departed, promising to keep them informed of Warren's prosecution, Ethan and Josephine stood together on the porch, watching the autumn sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard. "That's one problem resolved," Ethan said, breaking the companionable silence. "One of many in this complicated world," Josephine replied with a small smile, "but it's a significant relief to know I'm not a fugitive from justice." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Joe, now that this cloud has lifted, I want you to know that you're not obligated to stay at Silverleaf. If you wish to pursue other opportunities, teaching perhaps, or writing as you mentioned, I would understand." The offer took her by surprise. Are you asking me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, almost vehemently. "God, no, I'm trying inelegantly to ensure you know you have choices, that you're not staying out of necessity or fear." Understanding dawned, warming her heart. "Ethan Avery," she said softly, "are you asking me if I'm here of my own free will?" A flush crept up his neck. "I suppose I am." Josephine took a step closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Then yes, I am. Silverleaf has become home to me not because it offered shelter when I needed it, but because—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "Because you're here." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Ethan's expression shifted from uncertainty to something far more intense. "Joe," he breathed, reaching out to touch her cheek with calloused fingers. "I've been fighting this feeling for months. Telling myself it was wrong that I was your employer, your protector, that it was too soon after Hannah, that you deserved better than a man still carrying old griefs. And now," she whispered, leaning slightly into his touch, "now I'm tired of fighting," he admitted. "When Warren threatened you, when I thought I might lose you before I'd ever truly had you, it clarified things." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Ethan leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a demand. Josephine answered by rising on tiptoe, deepening the kiss, her hands coming to rest against his chest. The tenderness of the moment nearly undid her. This wasn't the desperate passion of romantic novels, but something deeper, a recognition, a homecoming, a promise. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Josephine Lawson. I think I have since that first day in Whispering Pines when you stood bloodied but unbowed." Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and overwhelming. "And I love you, Ethan Avery. Not despite your griefs and silences, but because of who they've helped you become." He kissed her again, more urgently this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Josephine melted against him, feeling for the first time in her life that she had found exactly where she belonged. A discreet cough from the doorway separated them. Mrs. Perkins stood there, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. "I beg your pardon," she said, not sounding particularly sorry at all. "But Eduardo needs to speak with you about the north fence line, Mr. Avery." "Something about coyotes getting through." Ethan nodded, reluctantly releasing Josephine. "I'll be right there." As Mrs. Perkins retreated, he turned back to Josephine with a rueful smile. "A rancher's work is never done." "Go," she said, straightening his collar where her hands had disturbed it. "We have time now." The certainty in her voice made his smile widen. "Yes," he agreed, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "We do." As autumn deepened toward winter, Silverleaf Ranch underwent subtle but significant changes. Josephine moved from her small bedroom off the kitchen to a larger one upstairs. Though propriety was maintained, she and Ethan would not share quarters until they were properly wed. Their engagement was announced at a small gathering of neighboring ranchers and townspeople from Cedar Ridge, with Mrs. Perkins beaming like a proud mother throughout the evening. The ranch hands accepted the news with varying degrees of enthusiasm, Eduardo offering sincere congratulations, the younger men teasing their boss good-naturedly about being lassoed by the prettiest filly in the territory. Sheriff Grant brought word that Warren had fled before arrest, disappearing into the mountains with whatever funds remained from his theft. Harrington, facing scrutiny over his business practices, had turned his attention away from Silverleaf, focusing instead on defending his reputation in Whispering Pines. "They may return to trouble us someday," Ethan acknowledged when he and Josephine discussed it. "But not, I think, anytime soon." Winter arrived with a blanketing snowfall that transformed Silverleaf into a wonderland of white. Inside the ranch house, preparations for a Christmas wedding occupied everyone's attention. Josephine, with Mrs. Perkins' help, sewed a simple but elegant white dress. Ethan rode to Denver to purchase a proper ring, returning half-frozen but triumphant with a gold band set with small diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto Josephine's finger. "My mother sent it when I wrote to tell them about you. They approved then." Josephine asked, admiring how the diamonds caught the lamplight. "They're planning to attend the wedding," Ethan confirmed. "All of them, my brothers, my sister and her husband, even my mother, though she rarely travels these days. They're eager to meet the woman who's brought life back to Silverleaf, and to me." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sun glinting off snow-covered mountains. The ranch house overflowed with guests, Ethan's family from Wyoming, neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Cedar Ridge, even Eduardo's extended family from their settlement nearby. Josephine stood before the mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who gazed back at her. A year ago, she had been alone in the world, working grueling hours at a textile mill, surviving but not truly living. Now she was about to become mistress of Silverleaf Ranch, wife to a man who valued her mind as much as her heart, surrounded by people who had become family. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Perkins' entrance. "It's time, dear," the older woman said, her eyes misting as she took in Josephine's appearance. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Josephine said, embracing her. "For everything, I wouldn't be here without you." "Nonsense," Mrs. Perkins replied, though she returned the hug warmly. "You and the boss would have found your way to each other somehow. Some things are simply meant to be." Downstairs, the parlor had been transformed, furniture moved aside to create space for the guests. At the far end, before the stone fireplace decked with evergreen boughs, Ethan waited with the minister from Cedar Ridge. He wore a new black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression as Josephine entered that took her breath away, wonder mixed with pride, love with desire, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices steady despite the emotion evident in both their faces. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and possessive, a public declaration of his commitment. The celebration continued well into the evening, with feasting, music, and dancing. Josephine was introduced to Ethan's family, his mother a dignified woman with Ethan's gray eyes, his brothers boisterous and teasing, his sister warm and welcoming. "You've accomplished what we thought impossible," his mother confided as they shared a quiet moment. "When Hannah died, a light went out in my son. I feared it would never return." She patted Josephine's hand. "Thank you for bringing him back to us." "He brought me back too," Josephine replied softly, "from a very dark place." As the night drew to a close, the guests departed or settled into temporary accommodations arranged throughout the ranch. Ethan led Josephine upstairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom now, which had been prepared with fresh linens, a roaring fire, and a bottle of champagne from Denver. "Welcome home, Mrs. Avery," he said as he closed the door behind them, his voice husky with emotion and desire. "Home," Josephine repeated, savoring the word. "I never truly understood what that meant until Silverleaf, until you." Ethan drew her into his arms, his kiss deep and unhurried. "I promise you, Joe, as long as there's breath in my body, you'll never lack for a home or a voice or love. And I promise you'll never regret telling that frightened, beaten girl to speak only to you," she whispered against his lips. "For the rest of our days, my truest words will always be for you." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing Silverleaf in pristine white, a clean page upon which their story would continue to unfold. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Ethan and Josephine found the peace and passion that comes only when two souls recognize each other as home. Spring came early to Colorado that year, bringing with it new life across Silverleaf Ranch. Calves tottered on spindly legs beside their mothers, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the silver-leafed cottonwoods along the creek unfurled fresh green leaves that shimmered in the breeze. Josephine stood on the porch, watching as Ethan worked with a spirited young stallion in the corral, the first foal born from their new breeding program. Her hand rested lightly on her abdomen, where their own new life was just beginning to make itself known. They had been married 4 months, and though the pregnancy was still their secret, she knew Ethan suspected. He had been watching her with a tender protectiveness lately, insisting she rest more frequently, his eyes following her with a mixture of wonder and concern. Mrs. Perkins emerged from the house, carrying a tray with lemonade. "You should tell him soon," she said without preamble, setting the tray on the small table. "He's driving the men crazy with his distraction." Josephine laughed, not surprised that the housekeeper had guessed her condition. "Is it that obvious, to a woman who's seen as many pregnancies as I have?" "Yes." Mrs. Perkins poured a glass of lemonade and handed it to Josephine. "Besides, you've had that same glow Hannah had when she was carrying." The mention of Hannah no longer brought pain, only a gentle acknowledgement of a life cherished and remembered. "I'm planning to tell him tonight," Josephine confided. "I wanted to be certain first. He'll be overjoyed," Mrs. Perkins assured her, "after losing Hannah and their son. This will be healing for him." Josephine nodded, her gaze returning to her husband as he guided the young horse through its paces. Ethan had shared the full story of Hannah's death during their engagement, the difficult labor, the frantic ride for the doctor, returning too late to save either mother or child. The grief had nearly destroyed him, leaving scars that might never fully heal. But he had found the courage to love again, to risk his heart once more. That evening, after supper, they took their customary walk along the creek. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, while the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "You've been quiet today," Ethan observed, his arm around her waist as they strolled. "Is something troubling you?" Josephine shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "Not troubling, no, but I do have something to tell you." They stopped beneath a large cottonwood, its new leaves rustling softly overhead. Ethan turned to face her, his expression curious but patient. Taking his hand, Josephine placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child, Ethan, in late October, the doctor believes." For a moment he stood absolutely still, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then a kaleidoscope of emotions crossed his face: shock, joy, fear, hope, before settling into a look of such profound love that Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick. Our baby. Yes, she confirmed, squeezing his hand. Are you happy? Instead of answering with words, Ethan gathered her carefully into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She felt the dampness of tears against her neck and held him tightly, understanding the complex emotions this news would evoke. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his eyes were shining. Happy doesn't begin to describe it, Joe. I'm overwhelmed, terrified, grateful. He touched her cheek reverently. But most of all, I'm in awe of you of the life we've created together. I know you're afraid, she said softly, acknowledging the shadow that had briefly crossed his expression. After what happened with Hannah, it's different this time, Ethan interrupted, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. You're different. The circumstances are different. And I promise you, Joe, you'll have the best care possible. I've already arranged for Dr. Mitchell from Denver to attend you when the time comes. Josephine blinked in surprise. You suspected? A small smile touched his lips. I hoped you've been glowing lately. And your appetite at breakfast has been quite impressive. She laughed, relieved by his calm acceptance. And here I thought I was being subtle. Not to a man who watches his wife as closely as I watch mine, Ethan replied, drawing her back into his arms. Nothing about you escapes my notice, Mrs. Avery. As they walked back to the house, making plans and sharing hopes for their child's future, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the brutal public beating that might have broken a lesser spirit to the happiness she now knew as Ethan's wife and partner, mistress of Silverleaf, and soon-to-be mother. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I was thinking about that day in Whispering Pines, she admitted. When you stopped the foreman and told me to speak only to you from now on. Not my most progressive moment, Ethan said ruefully. I was trying to protect you, but it came out sounding rather possessive. It was exactly what I needed to hear, Josephine assured him. Not because I wanted to be silenced, but because for the first time someone was offering me a safe place to find my voice again. She squeezed his hand. You gave me that gift, Ethan, the freedom to speak without fear of punishment. And you've certainly made use of it, he teased gently, especially when you disagree with my cattle breeding decisions. Only because you occasionally need a different perspective, she returned with a smile. And admit it, my suggestion about crossbreeding the Herefords with your Angus stock is proving successful. It is, Ethan acknowledged, pressing a kiss to her temple. As are most of your ideas, Mrs. Avery, I've learned it's generally wiser to listen when you speak than to argue. The ranch house came into view, lamplight glowing warmly from the windows. In the 5 months since their wedding, they had made subtle changes to the interior: new curtains, additional bookshelves, a piano in the parlor that Josephine was learning to play. Yet the essential character of the home Hannah had helped create remained, honored rather than erased. Shall we tell the others tomorrow? Josephine asked as they climbed the porch steps. Yes, Ethan agreed, though I suspect Mrs. Perkins already knows. She does, Josephine confirmed with a laugh. That woman misses nothing. Like someone else I know, Ethan said fondly, opening the door for her. Our child will have a difficult time getting away with mischief between the two of you. The months of Josephine's pregnancy passed in a blend of anticipation and preparation. A nursery was readied in the room adjoining the master bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow and furnished with a cradle Ethan crafted himself from ranch timber. Mrs. Perkins knitted blankets and tiny garments, while Eduardo's wife, Maria, contributed beautiful handmade quilts embroidered with protective symbols from her culture. Ethan proved both attentive and occasionally overprotective, insisting Josephine rest frequently and hiring additional help for the household duties. She tolerated his concern with good humor, understanding its roots in his past loss, but maintained her involvement in ranch operations, reviewing the books, helping with correspondence, and continuing her daily walks to stay healthy. By early October, with the aspen trees turning golden on the mountainsides, Josephine felt both enormous and impatient. Dr. Mitchell had arrived from Denver a week earlier, taking up residence in the guest room to ensure he would be present when labor began. Everything progresses normally, he assured both Ethan and Josephine after his daily examination. "The baby is in good position and you're strong and healthy, Mrs. Avery. I anticipate no complications." These words were meant primarily for Ethan, whose tension increased as the due date approached. At night, Josephine often woke to find him watching her in the darkness, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "You should sleep," she would whisper, covering his hand with hers. "I'm memorizing this," he would reply softly. "Every moment with you, with our child growing inside you, I want to remember it all." On a crisp autumn morning, with the first dusting of snow on the distant peaks, Josephine's labor began. Mrs. Perkins sent for Ethan, who was checking cattle in the south pasture, while Dr. Mitchell calmly prepared his instruments and medications. "It will be hours yet," he informed them both when Ethan arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. First babies typically take their time. But their child, like Josephine herself, proved determined and direct. By mid-afternoon, her labor had progressed rapidly, and as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Josephine gave a final push, and their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. "A girl," Dr. Mitchell announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant on Josephine's chest. "A healthy, strong girl." Josephine gazed down at their daughter in wonder, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of her small face. Beside the bed, Ethan stood transfixed, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "She's beautiful," he whispered, gently touching the downy dark hair that covered the baby's head. "Like her mother. Would you like to hold your daughter, Mr. Avery, doctor?" Mitchell asked, smiling at the new father's awe. With reverent care, Ethan took the swaddled infant in his arms, cradling her as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. The baby quieted immediately, seeming to recognize her father's embrace. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." "What shall we name her?" Josephine asked, watching the two people she loved most in the world. Ethan considered for a moment, studying their daughter's face. "Hannah always liked the name Elizabeth," he said softly, "for its strength and elegance." "Elizabeth," Josephine repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect, Elizabeth Avery." She paused, then added, "Perhaps Hannah as a middle name, to honor her memory." Gratitude and love shone in Ethan's eyes. "Elizabeth Hannah Avery," he agreed, "a name to grow into." News of Elizabeth's birth spread quickly across the ranch and to neighboring properties. Visitors arrived bearing gifts and good wishes, handmade toys, practical baby items, even a pony foal from Eduardo's best mare, to be raised alongside Elizabeth for her future mount. Ethan's family telegraphed their congratulations, promising to visit in the spring when travel would be easier. Sheriff Grant brought a silver rattle and word that Warren had been captured in New Mexico territory, finally facing justice for his crimes. As winter settled over Silverleaf, the ranch house took on a new dimension of warmth and purpose. Elizabeth thrived, growing stronger each day, her eyes gradually changing from newborn blue to a shade of gray that matched her father's. She had Josephine's determined chin and Ethan's quiet watchfulness, observing the world with a serious expression that often dissolved into unexpected, heart-melting smiles. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, the small family gathered in the parlor. Elizabeth, now nearly 2 months old, lay contentedly in her father's arms while Josephine played a simple carol on the piano. "I never imagined this," Ethan said softly when she finished playing. "After Hannah died, I thought my life would always be empty, that Silverleaf would always feel incomplete." Josephine moved to sit beside him on the sofa, leaning against his shoulder to gaze down at their sleeping daughter. "And now I understand that life doesn't move in straight lines," he replied, his arm coming around her. "It circles and doubles back, takes unexpected turns, brings endings and beginnings all tangled together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I couldn't have imagined you, Joe, or Elizabeth, or this profound happiness. Nor could I have imagined finding my voice and my heart in the same moment," Josephine said, thinking back to that fateful day in Whispering Pines. "When you told me to speak only to you, you weren't silencing me, you were inviting me to be heard. Truly heard, perhaps for the first time in my life. And I've been listening ever since," Ethan said with a smile, "even when I pretend not to." Elizabeth stirred in his arms, her tiny face scrunching before relaxing back into sleep. They watched her in contented silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. "Merry Christmas, my love," Josephine whispered, her hand finding Ethan's. "Merry Christmas, Joe," he replied, his fingers intertwining with hers. The first of many. Outside, snow continued to fall on Silverleaf Ranch, covering the land in pristine white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the home. Ethan and Josephine had created together a sanctuary where voices were heard, hearts were honored, and new beginnings were always possible. As Elizabeth grew from infant to toddler, Silverleaf Ranch prospered under the combined stewardship of Ethan and Josephine. Their partnership extended beyond marriage and parenthood to a true business collaboration, Ethan overseeing the cattle operations while Josephine managed the accounts and correspondence, gradually expanding their market reach to Denver and beyond. By the time Elizabeth was 3, she had a brother, James William Avery, named for both his grandfathers. While Elizabeth had inherited her father's serious demeanor and analytical mind, young Jamie was all sunshine and mischief, with his mother's chestnut hair and quick smile. The siblings adored each other, with Elizabeth appointing herself her brother's protector and teacher from the moment he could toddle after her. On a warm summer evening in 1882, 7 years after that fateful day in Whispering Pines, Josephine sat on the porch swing, watching her children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. Ethan joined her, freshly washed after a day working cattle, his dark hair now threaded with distinguished silver at the temples. "They're growing too fast," he observed, settling beside her on the swing. "Elizabeth was asking about riding to the north pasture with me tomorrow. Said she's old enough to help with the actual work, not just ride alongside." "She is her father's daughter," Josephine said with a smile, never satisfied with watching when she could be doing. "And Jamie spent the morning helping Mrs. Perkins bake pies. There was more flour on him than in the crusts, I believe." Josephine leaned against Ethan's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "He has your charm, you know, already has Mrs. Perkins wrapped around his finger." Ethan chuckled, his arm coming around her in a familiar, comfortable embrace. "I received a letter from Thomas today," he said, referring to Sheriff Grant. "He's retiring next month, moving to Denver to be near his daughter." "We'll miss him," Josephine said thoughtfully. "He's been a good friend to Silverleaf." "He has," Ethan agreed. "Which is why I'm considering his suggestion." Something in his tone made Josephine look up at him curiously. "What suggestion?" "That I run for sheriff of Cedar Ridge County." Josephine sat up straighter, surprised. "You, as sheriff?" Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The ranch is running smoothly, especially with Eduardo as foreman. You've organized the books so efficiently that even I can understand them now. And Thomas thinks the county needs someone with a strong sense of justice who can't be bought or intimidated." "All true," Josephine acknowledged. "But it would mean time away from Silverleaf, from the children." "It would," Ethan admitted. "Which is why I wanted to discuss it with you first. If you think it's a bad idea, I didn't say that," Josephine interrupted, her mind already working through the implications. "Actually, I think you'd make an excellent sheriff. You're fair-minded, practical, and people respect you, and the children are old enough now that they don't require constant supervision." Ethan studied her face. "There's more you're thinking, I can see it in your eyes." Josephine smiled, still touched by how well he read her after all these years. "I was thinking that if you became sheriff, there might be an opportunity to establish a proper school in Cedar Ridge. The town's growing, and there are at least 20 children of school age within riding distance." "And you've always wanted to teach," Ethan finished for her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This could be your chance." "Our chance," she corrected, "to expand our horizons beyond Silverleaf while still keeping it as our home and foundation." She took his hand, squeezing it gently. "The children would benefit from more structured education and interaction with others their age." "And Silverleaf?" Ethan asked. "We've built so much here." "Eduardo can manage the day-to-day operations," Josephine said confidently. "You'd still make the major decisions just as you do now. And we'd be here every evening and weekend." Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Elizabeth show Jamie how to throw a stick for the dogs to retrieve. When he spoke again, his voice was reflective. "When I brought you here 7 years ago, I thought I was offering you sanctuary. I never imagined you'd help me build a life beyond these boundaries, one that includes not just ranching, but family, community, maybe now public service. We've built it together, Josephine reminded him, just as we'll face this new chapter together. She paused, then added softly, if it's what you truly want. What I want, Ethan said, drawing her closer, is to continue making a difference for our children, for this community that's given us so much. If serving as sheriff accomplishes that, then yes, it's what I want. Then you have my full support, Josephine declared. Sheriff Avery, he laughed, shaking his head. I haven't won the election yet. You will, she said with certainty. The people of Cedar Ridge know quality when they see it. The election held that September proved Josephine right. Ethan won by a comfortable margin, and by October he had been sworn in as the new sheriff of Cedar Ridge County. True to her word, Josephine approached the town council about establishing a school, offering her services as teacher until a permanent appointment could be made. By the following spring, a small schoolhouse stood at the edge of Cedar Ridge, with Josephine teaching 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Elizabeth, now nearly 7, thrived in the classroom environment, her quick mind absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Even 4-year-old Jamie attended for half-days, more for socialization than formal learning. Ethan proved to be a natural at law enforcement firm, but fair, more interested in preventing trouble than punishing after the fact. Under his guidance, Cedar Ridge grew from a rough frontier town to a respectable community where families could settle without fear. One evening, as they rode home together from town, Ethan from his sheriff's office, Josephine from the schoolhouse, they paused at the top of the ridge overlooking Silverleaf. The ranch spread below them, bathed in the golden light of sunset, the silver-leafed cottonwoods along the creek shimmering in the evening breeze. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked, his gaze on the peaceful scene. Coming west, enduring what you did in Whispering Pines. Josephine considered the question seriously. I regret the pain and humiliation of that day, she admitted, but not the journey that brought me here, not the life we've built together. She turned to him with a smile. How could I regret anything that led me to you, to our children, to this place? Ethan reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. 7 years ago, I told a frightened young woman to speak only to me. It was presumptuous, perhaps even arrogant. It was exactly what I needed to hear, Josephine countered. Not because I wanted to be silenced, but because you were offering me a safe place to find my voice again. She squeezed his hand. And now look at us, you, the voice of law and justice for an entire county, me, helping children find their own voices through education. All because you had the courage to speak up that day in Whispering Pines, Ethan said softly, even knowing the cost. Worth every lash, Josephine declared, spurring her horse forward. Now come, Sheriff Avery. Your children will be waiting for stories before bedtime, and Mrs. Perkins promised apple dumplings for dessert. They rode down the slope toward home, side by side as they had been through 7 years of marriage, parenthood, and partnership. Behind them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Ahead, lamplight glowed from the windows of Silverleaf, where their children waited, where their future continued to unfold. The beaten girl who had been told to keep silent had found not only her voice but her purpose. The grieving rancher who had isolated himself in his pain had found not only healing but a new calling. Together, they had transformed a sanctuary into a launching point, extending their influence beyond boundaries while keeping their roots firmly planted in the land they both loved. As they approached the ranch yard, Elizabeth and Jamie burst from the house, racing to greet them with excited chatter about their day's adventures. Ethan and Josephine dismounted, gathering their children close, exchanging glances over their heads, a wordless communication born of deep understanding and abiding love. Some stories that begin in violence and fear can, with courage and compassion, transform into tales of triumph and joy. Ethan and Josephine Avery's was one such story, a testament to the healing power of love, the strength found in speaking truth, and the endless possibilities that open when two hearts find their way home to each other.